I'm Jim Pinkerton.
And I'm David Brin.
And we are bloggingheads.tv. And eventually we'll get this right.
I'm willing to try again.
No, that's okay.
Right.
Our audience, such as it is, likes the authenticity of Wayne's World-ish production values and professionalism. But anyway, we're actually excellent content providers. And David, we're almost at the 10th anniversary of one of the most influential and I think thought-provoking nonfiction books of recent times, which is The Transparent Society. Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, I'm known most as a novelist, and I was also an astronomer, but I tend to take these little guerrilla raids into other subjects, and I was very frustrated in the mid-'90s with some of the discussion that was taking place about privacy and about secrecy, about the coming age of cameras. I had lived in Britain during the Great Revolution when CCD cameras were put all over the country, and I saw the positive and negative effects. Crime did go down. The whole intergenerational hooligan war was solved. On the other hand, people were deeply worried that this was going to lead to Big Brother. And as I've said on many occasions, George Orwell's novel 1984, the most powerful aspect of it is that it served to be a self-preventing prophecy, something that girded us against the kind of failure mode that he portrayed. And the most chilling thing about 1984 was the telescreen, the camera controlled by the state that's in everybody's homes. I'm now in front of a camera that's inside my home, but I control it. And that is the difference between a world of one-way transparency and two-way transparencies. The kids seem to get it on MySpace and all. They're doing things on their MySpace sites that they will regret later. But if they build a civilization that's generally tolerant of harmless human doofus stupidity, if a civilization 20, 30 years from now is generally forgiving, then they'll be able to wince over these things they're doing on their MySpace accounts and get on with their adult lives. In other words, what they are doing is they're committing themselves down the path of transparency and tolerance by doing these silly things on their sites, their exhibitionist things, nude photos and all of that. They are committing themselves to have to fight for that civilization that I describe in The Transparent Society. Certainly this issue of what people know and the one-wayness or the two-waynesses. How do you feel about bringing the same level of density of cameras that they have in Britain to America, or do you think it's inevitable? Well, we do have the same density of cameras in America as they do in Britain. It's just that very few of ours are state-controlled. Most of ours are controlled by private individuals, by corporations, by banks. You can't walk through any modern urban setting without going from one camera view to the next camera view to the next. In the Oklahoma City bombing, the FBI knocked on doors and said, "Can we please see your camera recordings?" And people said, "Yeah, sure." Under other circumstances, the state may knock on doors and say this, and an angry populace that's opposed to the state may say, "Show us your search warrant." That's the thing that's better about distributed access to the cameras. But it's all going to be moot in 10, 20 years from now. The what's called Brin's corollary of Moore's law is that the cameras are increasing in their speed, their capability, and decreasing in size and cost at a rate far faster than Moore's law. In 10 years or so, a kid, a 5-year-old, will buy a roll of stickers, just like you see them buy today, and sticking them everywhere. Only these will be penny cameras. The moment it's stuck to a wall, a 1-year battery starts up, and it addresses the image that it views to a unique address in IPv6 cyberspace. What are you going to do in a world like that? Option number one is make such things illegal, in which case all you're guaranteeing is that elites will continue to have these things, but you won't. Elites of criminality, elites of government, elites of foreign elites, commercial elites, elites of money, and then you won't. You'll be blind, but they'll be able to see. Because anybody who believes that mere laws are going to keep the rich and the mighty from using any ability to see and to know, well, such people really need to try an experiment, and here's the assignment. You go to the nearest zoo, you sharpen a pointed stick, you climb into the baboon enclosure, and you try to put the stick into the eye of the biggest baboon. Here's a hint. He won't let you. But reluctantly, the baboon may let you look back at him. Our powers that be are not going to let us blind them. It's impossible. There are no precedents in all of human history. This whole way in which the civil libertarians are fighting against the Patriot Act is wrong. Yes, the Patriot Act sucks. Yes, it's a horrible attack upon our freedoms. But they're trying to push back what the government can see. And that doesn't make any sense. The next time we have a terrorist attack, they'll simply get those powers back again. The way in which we should be fighting the Patriot Act is by increasing the degree to which we can supervise the government, decreasing the incredible skyrocketing of secrecy that's been taking place, in which the Bush administration has introduced more secrecy than we had during the Cold War, when we were in a bitter struggle against the Soviet KGB and 10,000 hair-trigger nuclear weapons.
Are you saying then sort of guard the guardians then? I mean, watch the watchers?
Exactly. Watch the watchers. I don't care so much if the NSA snoops on my mail, just like the teenagers in MySpace. Hey kids, I'm an old fart and I'm with it. I don't care if they look at me. What I want is for a substantial diversity of respectable adults to be looking at them, to be supervising them, to be supervising the FBI.
So we have a kind of people's Congress. It's almost like these ideas that this professor, this political scientist at the University of Texas named Fishkin, I've forgotten his first name, talks about, where, you sort of create your own sort of parallel legislative, deliberative body of random citizens. It's a little bit like what the ancient Athenians had in mind. And they just simply are summoned to talk about the issues too. It's just sort of a parallel decision-making process. And Fishkin has done a lot of work on this, and it's an interesting idea. It never really has sort of taken off, at least at the national level. But
well, I'd be happy to start with the People's Congress as being the Congress of the United States actually doing some of this. But I have proposed a number of things. Go to davidbrin.com, my website, and see my suggestions to the new Congress. I think it's davidbrin.com/suggestions.html. But one of them is that we simply take all of the inspectors general of all the different departments of the United States, who are now basically whores. They've been appointed as shills they owe their jobs to the very people they're supposed to inspect, and take them all away from the authority of the cabinet secretaries and the administration and put them under a quasi-military organization under the Inspector General of the United States. And this would be a completely separate agency, and the law could be written on one piece of paper. And the Inspector General of the United States would then have inspectors general throughout the government almost instantly, overnight, and they would report to her instead. And that's the sort of thing.
There is, of course, a comptroller general.
Oh, well, I'm all in favor of amateur,
that's a public entity. I mean, the
yes,
comptroller...
I know. And those sorts of things need to be removed from the direct chain of command of the president and the politicians. That's what the Civil Service Bill was all about. And opponents of the Bush administration, I think, are missing the key issue. that to use against this monstrous takeover of the Republican Party that has Barry Goldwater spinning in his grave. I mean, that's how they're powering half of the state of Arizona, did you know? Magnets and coils put around Barry Goldwater's grave. This is not about left and right anymore. It's about one of our great political parties and great political movements having been taken over by a bona fide criminal gang.
That would be George Bush, you're saying?
Yeah. The correlations are perfect. And it's one of the reasons why I have suggested that the Democrats and liberals really need to smarten up. Nothing that they say should be about left-right issues, not even health care. It should all be about simply ending the war against our skilled professionals of the civil service. The one consistent thing that this administration has been doing has been waging a war of oppression and repression and bullying against the mostly conservative and mostly Republican members of the FBI, the CIA, the Civil Service, the State Department, and especially the United States Military Officer Corps, who have been by far the worst victims of this gang.
Maybe you ought to elaborate a little bit. Let's break them down one by one.
Well, the Civil Service and the FBI and the CIA, these are all the professionals whose job it is to detect theft, to detect treason. If you are a criminal gang and you want to steal $500 billion to $1 trillion, the first thing you do is you appoint several thousand of your henchmen in charge of the top layers of the FBI, Justice, CIA, and all these departments, so that you can squelch the professionals and prevent them from doing their jobs.
And what was the theft?
Oh, well, the best theft example of theft is this. Too many of the liberals, look, I sound like I'm being critical of conservatives, but the liberals have gone quite nuts, too. They actually believe this Michael Moore thing that we went to Iraq in order to get oil. Show me the oil. The only effect on oil of Iraq is to keep their oil off the market and benefits certain other Bush friends. No, we did not go there to get oil. What happened was that since 2001, since 9/11, a state of emergency has been repeatedly declared every year for 6 years. Now, nobody is paying attention to legally what a state of emergency does. A state of emergency declared by the President of the United States allows the administration to allocate defense and other contracts bypassing normal contracting rules. No, it's a process issue, and all the advisors tell the Democrats, don't raise this because the people are bored by process issues. But it's a process issue that has resulted in $500 billion being stolen from us directly and quasi-legally.
For example?
All the Bush administration had to do was say, it's an emergency, and suddenly they no longer have to put service contracts for feeding our troops, for delivering supplies, for rebuilding the Iraqi infrastructure, for homeland security. They no longer have to give these contracts out for open bidding. They no longer have to take the lowest bidder. They no longer have to allow open vetting processes and reciprocal criticism of contractors. They have been able to, for 5 or 6 years, simply say, I am bypassing all of these normal rules because we're at war, because it's an emergency, and therefore this contract goes to, my pal.
Okay, but so you're talking about Halliburton and Blackwater and all these.
Of course.
Okay, so isn't this a little bit self-liquidating? I mean, right now Bush is at 26% popularity. Democrats won the Congress back, and Henry Waxman, the chairman of the House Government Oversight Committee, is subpoenaing, and Senator Levin, who's the chairman of the investigating committee on the Senate side of the same governing committee, they're subpoenaing every contract in sight. It does point, though, to the what I think is a larger phenomenon. I should put my cards on the table and say that I was one of the so-called Schedule C appointee in the Reagan and Bush 41 administrations. I was at the White House for most of that time, and during that time, as a political appointee serving at the pleasure of the president, we had, shall we say, a oftentimes rocky relationship with the bureaucracy that we felt oftentimes wasn't doing a very good job. They were insulated by civil service laws from actually not from us, but from doing their own jobs. So there is a counter to this, but we can come back to that later in terms of the merits of the Pendleton Act going back to 1882. But just to return to the issue of performance, it would seem to me that you can make a pretty good argument, and again, I've been part of this one way or another. Over the last 20 or 25 years, both parties have agreed on a pretty substantial privatization of much of the government. Both parties, Republicans more than the Democrats, but certainly the Democrats, certainly Al Gore and the reinventing government effort of the 90s agreed that there ought to be privatization and choice and competition. People like David Osborne wrote a whole book on reinventing government, in which one of the stars of that book, which goes back to about 1991, was Bill Clinton as governor of Arkansas. So
you're quite right about that. And here's the amazing thing about this stupid left-right political axis. I mean, we should abandon it if for no other reason because it's French. I mean, it's almost 300 years old. If you got a room of 20 people together, gave them a piece of paper, say, write down what you mean by left and right, you'd be you would not have to pay a single dollar if you offered it to any two people who would come up with the same answer. When you have a situation where Bill Clinton balanced the budget, and for the first time Al Gore, under the reinventing government program that you described, reduced the non-defense federal payroll. When Reagan and Bush, neither Bush ever did, when more government deregulations took place under Democrats than has ever taken place under Republicans, then it's time to let go of these hoary cliches that even the parties themselves hold on to.
Fair enough. But you were saying before about on the issues of cameras about the virtues of distributed power and so on. I mean, could
yeah. Well, look. Both Republicans and Democrats talk about deregulation and taking government off of the people's backs. In the Democrats' case, it's a case of frenetic, manic fine-tuning in order to try to get stuff done. If you take a look at which industries were deregulated by Democrats, banking, trucking, telecommunications, airlines, and handing the internet over to the world, these deregulations tended to flatten hierarchies and to enhance the capabilities of individuals to see what's going on. In other words, to enhance the ability of those markets to compete better. Trucking, banking, telecommunications, they all had that effect. The one exception was the Telecommunications Act, which got some nasty stuff slipped into it. It did do some good things. It was meant to do more good things, but it also resulted in us getting raped on the cable aspect of things, and that was a failure. If you take a look at the deregulations that have been given to us by Republicans, it was savings and loan under Reagan and Bush Sr., and it was the energy regulation under Bush Sr. and then again under Bush Jr. And it was the mortgage industry under Bush Jr. and the deregulation of emergency contracts under Bush Jr.
So you're saying that the good deregulation was done by Democrats and the bad deregulation was done by Republicans?
It's right there in history. It's right there in history. I mean, what good can be said about the savings and loan deregulation of Reagan Bush, except that it ripped off the American people for $250 billion?
The only thing I would say is that the history of deregulation on savings and loan was SNL's
was very, very bipartisan. Jim Wright was up to his eyebrows, the former Speaker of the House, and Dennis DeConcini, the senator from Arizona, was the ringleader of the Keating Five. The five senators, including, of course, a bipartisan bunch, including John McCain. I mean, they were all over that, eagerly.
And there are corrupt Democrats, and there are stupid Democrats. I'm not saying this is a universal thing. I'm saying that it's a point of view, it's a perspective that needs to be discussed. It needs to be looked at. And what we're looking at right now is the worst example of a Republican-led deregulation that has strong potential for out and out stealing our entire republic. And that is the demolition of the professional civil service in the United States of America. And it focused specifically on the United States Officer Corps. If you could do Google searches back to 2002, 2003, 2004, I am the only person on the internet using the terms Officer Corps, saying that these are the principal victims, they are being harassed, they are being repressed. And there is no president in all of our lifetimes as viciously, biliously, venomously hated by the United States Officer Corps as this one.
I have to say that I live in Northern Virginia, and PX Kelly, who's a former commandant of the Marine Corps, lives in my building. I'm 2 miles from the Pentagon. I would say that probably 80% of the uniformed officers that I know or know of voted for Bush in 2004. I actually kind of agree with you that the Bush administration, especially the Paul Wolfowitz of the world, have launched or attempted to launch something of a purge of General Shinseki and others who had heterodox ideas and so on this. But I think that the generals and other officers surveying the political landscape say, look, Bush has sort of invoked a kind of orthodoxy on us on Iraq and so on and so on. On the other hand, we do salute the flag, we do follow the commander-in-chief, and we also know, thanks to John Kerry and other Democrats and MoveOn.org and so on, what the Democrats think of us. So if I were a professional career service, military service man or woman, I would think, gee, the Republicans kind of treat us badly, but at least halfway show us respect, and plenty of people on the left just despise us. So.
And I'm stunned by this, because you are comparing the crackpots of the left who do not own and operate a political party to the people who own and operate the political party and the government on the right. That's apples and oranges.
Well,
try talking to the Pentagon people about how they felt dealing with Bill Clinton. They were treated with utter respect. The Powell Doctrine was engaged 100% in the war in Bosnia, which was by far our most successful war in the history of the United States. We went in with full support from our allies into a situation that was well prepared, with exit strategy, with clear-cut goals, ferocious, overwhelming use of Powell Doctrine force to achieve surgical ends perfectly, resulting in a European continent that was at peace and at law for the first time in 4,000 years, at the cost of 0 American lives. And the Afghanistan campaign, the initial Afghanistan campaign that is pointed to as an example of Bush's success, take a look at the timing. Bush had time only to say go to a war plan that was already on the books. It had been designed by Clinton Clark. It was ready to go. And the proof of this is that Osama bin Laden assassinated Massoud, the Northern Alliance leader, the day before 9/11, because he knew perfectly well that this plan was on the books.
Well, I certainly agree that the Kosovo campaign, excuse me, was successful. I am a big fan of Wesley Clark. I thought that his book from like 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe longer than that, Winning America's Wars, was brilliant. He definitely has his finger on the way that wars are fought, and his success in Kosovo proves it. I would just sort of leave it out for the viewers to say, okay, if everything that David and Jim are both saying is true in terms of like political reality, then why is it that the officers are so overwhelmingly pro-Bush?
No. You're using the present tense.
Well, we're definitely, and now the situation in Iraq has gotten so bad, and the situation with the military has gotten so bad. But as I said earlier, I think probably in 2004, I stand by my number of just 80%.
Well, there was habit. There was habit, and this is why I mentioned in my ostrich thing. We have a situation right now in which Karl Rove's Big Tent coalition, which has enabled and empowered these thieves, consists of a number of different factions. And you have the fundamentalist evangelical community, which is starting to face its own rebellion from younger people who are starting to see the insanity. It's deeply sincere evangelical Christians who nevertheless see how their movement has been hijacked. You have the kleptocrats themselves. You have a number of different subgroups in this alliance. But the largest group within this alliance is decent American conservatives who've had their own reasons for being conservative and have buried their heads in the sand to hide from themselves the fact that their tradition, that almost everything has been reversed. A movement that was based upon traditions of prudence and restraint has now been sent pell-mell into reckless adventurism. One that was based upon saving for your grandchildren is now hell-bent to spend everything that their grandchildren and put their grandchildren into hock forever. One that is based upon fundamental rights, including states' rights, now tramples over individual rights and is the #1 administration in the history of the country for repressing the state's ability to do their own laws and their own experiments. Gradually, over the last 10 years, their movement has been hijacked by people who are doing the diametric opposite and using Fox News to redefine conservatism as the very opposite of everything that it had stood for. These people who are running the GOP are not conservative. They are radicals. And the one group that always benefits from them, and I will be accused of raising class war. But here's something for the readers. I mean, your viewers are probably historically very, very savvy. Go back in time and look at a civilization. Find any civilization in which there was not class conflict. You'll find only one in which there was not class conflict, and that is the one we grew up in. The America of the 1950s through the 90s, in which a flattened social order plus contempt for communism and socialism meant that if you raised class as an issue, that you were somehow some sort of freeping lefty fool. Well, believe me, there are freeping lefty fools. I can get off on them. The only reason why I'm concentrating on the right and not the left is because the right owns a political party and the left doesn't. The point is that if you look at human history, there was class conflict because it is natural human nature for elites who have power to abuse power, to cheat in order to get more. It is fundamental. It's what you would do. It's what I would do.
Okay, is there such a thing as a natural ethnic conflict too?
National what?
Ethnic conflict as well.
Well, there is a dynamic in the West that compels against ethnic conflict, and that is the incredible drive toward tolerance that has been part of our propaganda system and part of the fact that as long as we have enough to eat and our children are raised together, the natural tendency in American-led civilization has been to spread the boundaries of who we include within the tent. We've seen this all our lives, and part of the normal tension between liberals and conservatives is simply over the pace with which we extend these boundaries. I mean, look at all the conservatives who have pictures of Martin Luther King on on their wall and would vote for Condi Rice in a shot and honestly look in the mirror and say, I was never racist. Because we reconfigure, we reframe what it means to be what we are.
Okay, would you say that gay marriage then is inevitable?
Well, I personally wish they had done a simple little bit of reframing of their own. If they had simply changed one consonant. Because the American people have proved to be very okay with civil unions. I mean, 80% of the American people have been fine with contractual civil unions. All the gay community had to do was simply change a consonant and say, okay, we'll call ours marriage.
What's the L for?
So
what's the L for?
Just so you conservative people, you can have your marriage.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I was about to say that I think that the expanding circle of tolerance, so on, does have limits.
It should, but it should go both ways. Liberals should have some tolerance of people who aren't as fetishistic as they are about expanding tolerance. See, now you did it. You got me swinging around and being contrary Brin. That's the name of my blog site. I can be contrary to the left as easily as I'm contrary.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, just so we're all fair and balanced here. Why is it that Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are lower in the polls, according to some measures, and a little bit higher, according to others, than is Bush? What have they done wrong in the minds of the American people?
Well, you've got to understand that two-thirds of that you start out with Republicans who are down on Bush, clinging to being able to grumble about Clinton and the Democrats. So you start out with 45% down on them, and then you have the 50% of Democrats who are angry at how little Pelosi and Reid have been able to do.
So do you think that Pelosi and Reid would have been more popular if, for example, they had directly tried to end the Iraq War, just pulled the plug financially on it?
Oh yes. But the point is that the unpopularity portion that they get from Democrats is not a I hate them and want to get rid of them unpopularity. It's a I wish they were doing more, in the moment that they do, I'll back.
I think it's just worth stamping this, memorializing this for this conversation. In other words, see, I believe that the Democrats, if they had succeeded in pulling the plug on the Iraq War, which I opposed. I was against it from 2002 and against it to this day. If the Democrats had done that, and if there was some catastrophic evacuation of Baghdad, and people on the roof of the embassy with helicopters coming down to pluck them away, I think the Republicans would be sailing their victory in 2008 and 2010 and 2012.
Well, I don't think that's true, but I do believe that Pelosi and Reid are more savvy than a lot of their supporters. And this is why I keep saying that the radical left does not own the Democratic Party. It's primarily run by pragmatists. God help us if both parties, if our radicalization of our civilization continues, and the Democrats get taken over by their radicals.
I certainly agree that, look, obviously you and I shared that we've never met until this particular Blogging Heads conversation. We sort of agree on a basic prudential centrism, as I suppose handed down to us from everybody from Aristotle to Edmund Burke to Isaiah Berlin. But I think that the problem the Democrats have is they've never really been able to separate themselves adequately from their left-wing fringe. Perceptually, MoveOn.org and billionaires and bloggers control much of the Democratic Party,
and that is a perception that is fostered by those who want to keep Karl Rove's coalition together.
But you grant that MoveOn wants to keep that perception going too.
Of course, but look, it's. You see one political party that has managed to maintain itself as a modernist, pragmatic political force in our lives, and they get screamed at because there are leftists near them. Whereas you have another party that has been taken over by its most monstrous howling lunatics and thieves. I'm sorry, that's a double standard.
What if it were true the Democrats had been taken over by sort of the old paradigm bureaucracy, old paradigm systems that weren't working very well, that had, for example, misgoverned the cities and had left every big city in the country in near ruin by the 70s and the 80s, and people said, well, obviously this mechanism we've created here of centralized bureau for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, for example, and the Department of HHS and the welfare system as it was, this is so bad that we have to try something new. We can't have a permanent underclass that we developed under the administration of liberalism. Maybe that was so horrible that people have been flying away from it ever since.
And who is it that immediately began trying to tweak in the other direction? The one decent thing that came out of Newt Gingrich's takeover of the Congress in 1994. Clinton reached out to him, and together that Congress and Clinton passed welfare reform.
Actually, I think you got the sequence wrong a little bit. It's actually Tommy Thompson, the Republican governor of Wisconsin, going back to the mid-'80s, who was doing this. And Clinton vetoed welfare reform twice. And most of the Democratic Party, you look at the vote from like August 1996, opposed welfare reform. So I'll give Clinton credit for signing it reluctantly, and for Dick Morris for talking him into signing it. But according to all the books, Hillary Clinton, from her position inside the White House, opposed signing the welfare reform. And so it was quite a fight. I think if it had been left up to the Democratic Party by itself, it never would have happened.
And this is an example of niggling on specific political details while the house is burning. We're talking about a situation right here in which, after that happened, the neocon movement decided not to do any further legislating, any further governing. The subsequent 6 years of the Clinton administration was 6 years of bilious culture war in which nothing happened.
Except welfare reform.
After welfare reform.
Well, that was 4 years.
Absolutely nothing happened. And we have a situation in which you had the laziest Congress in our history spending close to $1 billion hounding what later turned out to be by far the most honest administration and efficient administration the country has ever seen.
This would be Bill Clinton.
Yes, if you say this to ostriches, if you say this to conservatives, to Republicans, they'll howl, and I purposely said it in a confrontational way. But let me put it to you very, very baldly and frankly. We were put through 6 years of utter hell hounding Bill Clinton, and all that they ever got on him was a fib about some nookie in a hallway. We were promised that as soon as honest men and women got their hands on the filing cabinets in the executive department, that Clintonites would be hurled into jail left and right from the most corrupt administration the world has ever seen.
Well, the White House travel office, was that honest government from the Clintons?
The White House, you dare to raise the White House travel office. A small violation in procedure in the transferring of 2 clerical workers.
Sicking the FBI on them?
Oh, you know what? You compare that to 1 microsecond of what we're being put under by the Gitmos.
Let's take one thing at a time. I don't think you've heard me defending Bush very much on this conversation.
Because it is totally relevant. It is totally relevant. That is the sort of thing that you criticize and it gets fixed.
It got fixed only after the Clinton administration tried to put the guy, Billy Dale, in jail.
And you know what? Here is the crux. Here is the crux. If you think that they did something wrong, prosecute them.
Well,
you're claiming that they did this
wrong. It's hard to prosecute somebody when you don't control the Justice Department.
And what do you think? And what do you think that George Bush Jr. did as soon as he got into office?
Well, the first thing he should have done was gone after Clinton on the Mark Rich pardon. That was pretty flagrant. How come he didn't?
I'll tell you why he didn't. Because he did. George Bush reassigned more than 100 FBI and Justice Department agents from jobs protecting the people of the United States to sifting cabinets looking for smoking guns about the Clintons. And two things happened. Absolutely nothing. And let me make this statistic extremely clear. After $1 billion spent when the Republicans had control over subpoena power for 6 years under Clinton throughout when they controlled the legislature and subpoena power and spent $1 billion of private money on this. And after 6 years of having all three branches of government, do you know what the sum total of Clintonites who have been sent to prison or convicted or indicted for malfeasance in the actual performance of their public duties? Do you know what the sum total is?
Not offhand.
0.
Okay, Webb Hubble?
0.
Webb Hubble?
What does that say?
Webb Hubble, for one, that I can think of.
Not for the performance of his actual
it's all
office.
what he did beforehand. I mean, look, would you say that what would you say the Mark Rich pardon speaks to in terms of Bill Clinton?
I would say that you are going to see a pardon tsunami that is unbelievable.
I think let's put two things. I think we're making a error here. Every time we talk about Clinton, you say Bush is worse. I'm perfectly happy to talk about Bush, but I think we should address head-on some of these Clinton things, because then we'll both have credibility with our viewers to go to Bush.
That's not true. I asked you, if Bill Clinton did things wrong, and he was opposed by incredibly well-heeled, rich, powerful, well-positioned people who had subpoena power.
But maybe they were in. For example, do you think that the Chinese coffees from the 1996 campaign was or was not a serious issue?
Look, do you believe we live in a civilization in which competent people armed with subpoena power and 12 years and $1 billion should be more effective at telling us whether or not someone was crooked than rumors?
I mean, so all those Johnny Chungs and so on, I mean, it's in our Anglo-Saxon legal system, it is hard to convict somebody. But when Johnny Chung says, for example, that going to the White House is like putting your money in a subway turnstile. You put the money in the slot and you get to go in. I mean, I think that speaks loudly to the ethical level of the Clinton White House, even whether or not he was convicted of anything.
And look at what you're reduced to. We're a nation of laws. If you yammer and yammer and yammer that somebody is corrupt because of this or that, a person has a right to say, prove it. And if you cannot prove it when you have had 12 years of subpoena power, $1 billion of private and tax-paid investigators, when you have had access to every single document in the federal government, when you have had access to absolutely everything, and you took 100 FBI and justice agents off of duties protecting the people of the United States during the run-up to 9/11, if you took 100 people who were supposed to be defending us and sent them looking on wild goose chase searches for smoking guns,
I think actually,
and you cannot find anything, I think it's time. It's time for you to be grown up and let it go.
So we shouldn't. So actually, the point is the Bush administration deliberately didn't investigate the Mark Rich pardon because the Mark Rich's lawyer, Scooter Libby, of course, went to work for the Bush administration. I mean,
well, you can come up with the conspiracy theories all you want. The fact is, and I'm not saying that justice always prevails, but when you have...
Well, put it this way, do you think pardoning Mark Rich was a good idea?
I don't think it was a good idea.
Okay, do you think that Mark Rich's enormous campaign contributions and that of his wife to the Clinton campaign helped secure the pardon?
I I have no idea.
Think he would think if he hadn't given them, if his wife hadn't given the money, he would have gotten the pardon?
I have no idea, and it stinks. And what you are telling me is that until the end of time, you will raise that, even though the institutions that we have assigned for finding such things have cleared the Clinton administration of having ever done one indictable offense. That is 2 orders of magnitude better than any other administration in the history of the United States. But you will go back again and again and again to things that are innuendo and not proved.
There are plenty of conspiracies that one can reasonably intuit existed that weren't proven at the time, that only came out.
And all I can tell you is that when the conspiracies have been the focus of 12 years of subpoenas, $1 billion, Rupert Murdoch and many, many others supplying unlimited funds, and then the President of the United States taking counterterrorism agents off of the duty of protecting us during the run-up to 9/11, which is treason, and assigning them to finding smoking guns that they failed to find, there comes a point, my friend, when you've got to take a hint.
Just for the record, did you just say that Bush committed treason?
I believe that anybody who reassigns FBI agents and Justice Department officials to pursue private political vendettas, and those agents might have prevented a terrorist attack upon the United States, whether or not it is legalistically treason, it certainly works out that way.
So in other words, so if I say that I thought there's corruption and criminality in the Clinton era, and you say, but it wasn't proven, but I say I still think it happened, that counts. I mean, that doesn't count. But if you say, listen, you can throw around a word like treason, which is a pretty hot term, and then you say, listen, just because I can't prove it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So in other words, you can do it and I can't.
I can say, listen, this is fresh. You were welcome to try to prove Mark Rich. I can prove that FBI agents were transferred.
I mean, I only wish that I had the resources to investigate Johnny Chung and Johnny Tree and hold on, let me finish, and the Lippo Bank from the Riotti family. However, what is interesting to me and instructive is the same thing seems to be happening now in real time to Norman Shue and these 1/3 of the Clinton campaign contributors who don't seem to actually exist. The rest of them are like busboys and waiters who probably don't have legitimately and honestly $1,000 or $23 million to contribute. They all seem to be managing to be pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into the Clinton campaign. How do you think that's happening? Right now, in real time.
Whitewater was about $80,000. That is as much as Bush cronies are stealing every second.
Well, I mean, again, you're using words like treason and stealing and so on and so on. I'm content.
No, just a darn minute. Let's talk about the emergency. The emergency declaration. You have a situation in which all through the Cold War we grew up expecting mushroom clouds. The KGB was professional. They knew what they were doing. They were terrifying. We have been told, mostly by red state America, that because of attacks on blue America, and blue America is in the crosshairs, blue America has said, go ahead and tax us to win this war. We don't mind paying for and not having our grandchildren be in debt. But if we're going to fight it, be open with us, ask for volunteers, tax everybody who can afford to pay. But above all, we're in the crosshairs. It was Bostonians who stood up on Flight UA-93 and fought back. The only time that fighting back against terrorism per se actually happened. It was New Yorkers who stood upon the rubble in 9/11 and shouted eastward, "Is that all you got?" And yet a funny thing, the victims and the people who are in the crosshairs are the ones who are saying, "How dare you declare an emergency? Let us get back to our lives." Declaring this endless emergency gives the terrorists what they want. Changing our values, changing our way of life, driving off our allies. That's treason. When you have a situation in which America was loved and the center of the unipolar leader of the world when Clinton left office, only 3 nations complained about us being the unipolar leader of the world in moral values, in police, in all other aspects. China, Russia, and France kept calling meetings. What do we do about America? What do we do about American hegemony? And nobody came. These meetings are now attended by everybody now. Malcolm Fraser, former conservative Prime Minister of Australia, just yesterday, published a scathing document saying the moral helm of the world has to be taken away from America. America has gone insane. If you have a situation in which our allies have all been driven away from us, we are despised and we cannot lead the world, do you know what the neocon answer to that is? The neocon answer to that is, fuck the world. So
I think that we have 2 schools. I remember, and when it comes to the Bush foreign policy, I'm pretty sure we basically agree with, I should hasten to add, this caveat, which is I would take the language down. And again, you're free not to, but in my case, I would agree with this, taking the language down from the F word and treason and so on. I think that there's a danger of overstating these issues.
Do you know how many ready divisions ready brigades the United States had when Bill Clinton handed over the military to George Bush? We had 30 fully combat-ready Army brigades, and at least 3 or 4 more in the Marines. 30 ready combat brigades. George Bush criticized Bill Clinton for only being able to handle 2 major regional wars at the same time. Do you know how many ready combat brigades we now have?
I assume you're going to count the ones deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan as not ready.
No, they're not ready. I have been to Fort Irwin. My TV show, The Architects. You should look it up online. It showed on the History Channel very, very briefly, and they never even showed the episode that we filmed out at Fort Irwin, designing the next Humvee. It's a pity. But the thing is that out at Fort Irwin, whole brigades used to go to train, to wage war, to fight real war and defend us. It has been a decade, about 7 years, since any brigades have gone to Fort Irwin to train for war. Now at Fort Irwin, platoon-sized units go in to streak in and out of little Arab villages. We have converted almost all of the United States Army into SWAT teams. They no longer train for war. Their equipment is worn down. Their morale is down around their ankles. The only way that sergeants are being retained is that they are being offered lucrative jobs by Blackwater Security Services. Even though we have upped the re-enlistment bonuses by a factor of 10. Do you know how many ready brigades we have? We have 2 ready brigades in the Airborne, the 101st and the 82nd, but they're SWAT teams by assignment. They're supposed to be SWAT teams. We have 2 ready brigades left in the United States military, and they are in Korea. If Mexico wanted to invade us right now, we'd have a hard time keeping them out.
Well, look, I have written myself a great deal about, if you really want to mobilize for a war, it looks much different than what we're doing now. And I recall, the draft and
Why is readiness not an issue? And this comes back to the topic of the ostriches. This is why I am I despise the leadership of the Democratic Party for falling into yet another Karl Rove trap and allowing issues to be matters of left and right, allowing Fox News to couch these things in terms of left and right, even though the leftness of the Democratic positions is profoundly mild.
Well, I think a couple points. First of all, I think that, I work at Fox News, and I think you're kind of overstating their power. I think, look, if Karl Rove and Fox and Bill O'Reilly and whoever have the kind of influence you have, I think that everybody, and I'm not saying this includes you, but every Democrat and everybody on the liberal left end of the spectrum ought to say, look, how did we wind up ceding, that's with a C, ceding so much power to the right? And I think the answer is that somewhere back in the 60s, the Democrats made a jerk to the left and were punished badly at the polls in 1968, and then even worse in 1972, and they've really been sort of struggling to recover ever since. I'll agree. I've been to Fort Irwin as well, and I certainly saw that most of the training there was as you say, getting 50-year-old, or as I observed, paunchy 50-year-old National Guardsmen to learn teaching them how to knock down a door. This was not really the kind of war that we're going to fight with China. But it was the kind of war that they obviously were getting shipped off to go to Iraq or Afghanistan to do, and it's not a good use of American forces, and it's a kind of I'll leave it at that. It's not a good use of American forces, but it's certainly telling to me that the Democrats, have gotten themselves in a situation where they've let themselves be the minority party, and I think that speaks, I think, there's more self-insight and self-awareness is required among those who want to see a vigorous two-party system going, because I think that much of what you're saying has some merit in terms of like the underlying substance, and I just only wish that the Democrats were more credible as an alternative than they are.
Well, all I can say is if you look at Bill Clinton and you stop looking for conspiracy theories that were never proved, then if you look past those, you realize that he won a J.D. Powers Award for management, for heaven's sake. I mean, what conservative value do you want?
Well, let's go back to Clinton for a second. Let's leave aside all the ethical issues concerning Clinton. Let's leave them aside, for example, because you mentioned the J.D. Powers Award, and I mentioned earlier David Osborne's Reinventing Government, and I mentioned that Bill Clinton was one of those governors that Osborne celebrated in that book, which helped set the agenda for the kind of reinventing, flat pyramiding governmental thinking that actually I had done some work on as well in the Bush 41 era. So Clinton, I think, was very much a part of this. And would you say that Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and Barack Obama and John Edwards are to the left or to the right of Bill Clinton in the 90s?
Well, I hate the left-right axis. If you insist that I look at it, I would have to say that they would be ever so smidgeny to the left of him.
Okay.
But look, I blame Hillary for a lot of this. If she had simply said in 1993, if she had simply said, we're going to do this incrementally, we'll insure all the children first, the Republicans would not have dared to oppose that. Millions of American children would have had insurance, and yet it would have also paid attention to the American psychology, which is not European. And the American psychology is socialistic towards children and ferociously devil take the hindmost when it comes to adults. We're weird. The rest of the world thinks we're weird. And yet that is our way, and she should have known that. And she destroyed his presidency as an assertive legislating presidency.
Look, I actually agree. I mean, I remember back then in 1993 that Senator Dole, who was then the Republican minority leader, was pushing some sort of health care compromise. Was working with Senator Danforth and Senator Chafee, other Republicans, to do exactly this. And the Clinton White House wasn't interested. They waited a year through the first, and a president's always most effective at the beginning of his or her term. Before they could even get their program out the door because it was so tangled up in bureaucrats and organizational boxes.
And that does bother me about Hillary Clinton, but I have to tell you, you turn that around, and she believes in the Constitution of the United States. And that is refreshing. And look, I hope they don't nominate her for about a dozen different reasons. For one thing, I have been trying desperately to find somebody with some YouTubing talent to create, you remember that jib-jab thing with Kerry and Bush? This land is your land, this land is my land. Do you remember that?
Sure.
Yeah, that was loads of fun. Well, the one I'd like to see is a sort of a Greek chorus of Americans and holding up posters in front of them. And the first poster shows Reagan and Bush Sr. In 1980. And it says 1980 under it. And then they hold up another poster that says Reagan and Bush 1984. And then 1988 Bush. And then 1992 Clinton. And meanwhile they're chanting. They're saying Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton. And they go, oh, all right. Then they do it again. Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton. Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton, Bush. Okay. Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton, Bush. And then they go Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton. And they hold up Hillary in 2008. Well, sweat is starting to pour down their brows. But their game, they keep going. You know, Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton. And then Reagan Bush, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton, Bush. And, you know, now sweat is pouring down their faces, and they're starting to look very, very worried. And I think it would be very entertaining.
You know, it's funny. I mean, I'm a big fan of finding new ways to illustrate the same old stuff or the same new stuff. I mean, in other words, I think that you know, blogging heads, TV represents a kind of small d democratization, if you will, Brinian transparentization of the media, and I think that's healthy and fun and useful. I think the question before all of us, and you mentioned, you know, YouTube, is whether people, you know, of our general, like, over 30 age disposition can sort of rouse ourselves from our slumber or incompetence or laziness or general lack of a sort of finger spitzengefühl on, you know, in terms of fingertips on doing these things, to actually accomplish these kind of video illustrations, because the YouTube thing you did, I suspect some 20-year-old with an Apple computer could do exactly what you did in sort of no time, just sort of pulling down images from the web and so on.
Well, I think it would be devastating because it would get people to think about the very un-American concept of dynasties. Look, I happen to think that she's a fairly solid person, and the one thing that almost any Democrat would do, whether it's a cryptobiotic tardigrade or a slime mold, would be to fire 5,000 graduates of Bob Jones University who have been put in charge of cabinet departments and given choke chains over the throats of our civil servants. They are terrorizing our Justice Department people, the Food and Drug Administration, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, anything that is involved in government working. Look, these people had control over the legislature of the United States. If they wanted to change these regulations, they should have gone ahead and passed laws to change the regulations. They did not dare, and there's a reason. Because the average American has a certain amount of consensus about wanting to have their food and drug inspected. No, instead of taking advantage of the fact that they owned all three branches of government to actually change any laws, and they changed almost no laws, instead they appointed to top the federal departments that are in charge of enforcing the laws with people who know nothing whatsoever except about the Bible.
I think that, well, first of all, there's just a few overstatements there.
Yes, that's overstated.
Okay, 5,000 graduates of Bob Jones University, for example, would count as an overstatement. I mean, second of all, I would just observe that somebody who's been in Washington through, I think, like 5 presidents now, if your Schedule Cs go in there and don't change laws, and don't succeed in changing statutes and regulations, and simply try and do it through personnel, history is pretty decisive. They won't get very far. You can terrorize the bureaucrats at the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department for about 2 weeks before it all winds up in the Washington Post. Today on C-SPAN, I was just watching the House something or other committee has all these people from the Justice Department, under oath on TV, trashing. Their former Republican Schedule C Bush appointee bosses there. So I think that look, Charlie Peters, who is a Democrat, the godfather of the magazine The Washington Monthly, is a big opponent of lifelong civil service and a big proponent of spoil system patronage, precisely because it's accountable. There's certainly a debate to be had there back and forth, but I, as we wrap up here, and we've gone over an hour, it's been fun, but I should say at least, or insert for the record, that I think that the ability of the Bush administration to do things at midnight, no matter how hard they might have wanted to, the legacy of Alberto Gonzales is just about zero.
But the legacy of stealing $500 billion by declaring emergency bypasses of laws that your Congress passed in order to get competitive bidding. How could any conservative make excuses for something that rips off the taxpayer and is not capitalistic? It's not capitalistic to suppress competitive bidding and to simply, you know what it is? Listen. Adam Smith, if he were alive today, this is where this whole left-right axis is insane, because you try to get the lefties to pay attention to Adam Smith, and they say, oh, Mr. Capitalism. If you asked Adam Smith who the great enemies of free enterprise and capitalism were throughout all of human history, and you tried to throw socialism at him, he would laugh his head off. Socialism is a pathetic enemy of capitalism and free enterprise because it's inevitably outcompeted. If you look at 8,000 years of human history, the great enemy of free enterprise and markets and capitalism has been feudal aristocracy, cronies of the king, and that was the group that Adam Smith inveighed against.
Well, of course, I think that you're exactly right, and I agree with you. The author Carl Polanyi made that sort of similar type point in his book, The Great Transformation. However, Adam Smith, who died in the 1790s, never lived to see socialism and communism. They were
scary.
And they were kind of successful in places in terms of exterminating the kulaks in the Soviet Union, for example. So, in other words, let's not underestimate and again, the point's been made that communism only really arose in places that had feudalism first, and I think that's a good point. But certainly, the KGB and the Chinese government in China and other the Khmer Rouge, animated by whatever crazy, nutty version of socialism or communism they were espousing, would have given Adam Smith nightmares. Now, I certainly agree that the proper descendants of Adam Smith, who in his lifetime preached a quote well-regulated liberty, unquote, are more along the lines of Alexander Hamilton and George Washington than radical libertarians. I certainly agree with that.
Well, we're in a situation in which history needs to become relevant. And when one particular kind of failure mode destroyed all other democracies and all other market systems, it's important to note that it has risen in our civilization. And look, I laid into the left with great vigor when they attacked Ronald Reagan for calling the Soviet Union an evil empire. I said, what the hell else is it? Vigorous anti-communism. And the fact of the matter is that what's called the miracle of 1947 was when the Democratic Party and the Americans for Democratic Action and the core of the liberal movement held meetings in New York City and decided to not only disassociate themselves from communism and socialism, but to wage war against communism and socialism. They said openly, our side of the spectrum can go mad, and forever onward we will be wary of the mad ones on our side. It is time for the conservatives of America to hold their 1947, for them to gather together, and this is where if you Google online my name, David Brin, first off, at davidbrin.com, there's lots of non-political stuff about exploring the future. I consult for the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Defense about terrorism, and there's just a mazillion other topics there. But if you Google David Brin and the word ostrich, it talks about how the ostriches of America, the conservatives of America, have to lift their heads, and they have to do a 1947. And it is their turn to stand up and say, our side of the spectrum can go mad. And it is our turn to stand up as patriots and disassociate ourselves from monsters.
Well, again, with adjusting the language somewhat, I agree that the Republican Party, which I think is the majority party naturally for all the reasons that at least I've said, and maybe some of which you agreed with, it does have a burden to rethink its foreign policy. I think it has to rethink its homeland security policy. I think it has to rethink all the issues of American sovereignty in a pretty profound way. And I think that both parties need to continue to think about how one competently delivers social services such as education and healthcare and retirement and so on in a fair-minded, non-radical, and incrementalist way.
If only the discussion can go back to finding the things that we agree to about our children and then arguing with each other about how to deliver them. Bob Dole, you could argue with. You know, even Ronald Reagan, you could argue with him. You cannot argue with people who are waging culture war.
Well, I think you can. I think actually, as long as it is agreed to be peaceful and civil, you can argue. And I just remind also the Democrats can win. I mean, the Democrats won the 2006 elections pretty decisively. So in other words, I think there is more capacity for give and take and for the repudiation of failure than you might give it credit for.
You do not respect Karl Rove as much as I do. I think that we are going to see some very, very big things happen over the course of the next 6 to 9 months that are because there are major interests in this world who do not want to see transparency return to the American Republic.
Well, I think, Dave, that's a pretty good place to leave off. I regret that we didn't get a chance to, of course, time is fleeting, to talk about, imaginative speculations in the future and so on, which is
well, that's my bread and butter.
I know it is, and we got a little bit sidetracked onto partisan backing and forthing. But I will leave it to Bob Wright and the other aces who run Blogging Heads TV to think about whether or not I want to bring us back to hear about this, the future speculation that you teased on there. But who can resist stopping at that point and thinking, okay, what's going to happen in calendar year 2008? We're going to leave it on a moment of suspense.
I sincerely hope we do get to talk again about non-political matters, because if you think I was crackpot here, I can be crackpot far more entertainingly if we talk about the future and technology.
Well, I think your lifelong oeuvre of science fiction and many of which and books and the Transparent Society, many of which I've enjoyed, I think does say that, and so you've earned some credibility, even if I think you've, shall we say, overstated things a little bit here and there.
Well, look, we all take our turns overstating things. I think a lot of things were overstated in the 90s, and right now I can only tell you this: the person who did these overstatings in this has never been as scared for his republic.
Okay.
Now, I am quite frankly terrified And if I was a little bit if I was a little bit vigorous and say polemical in trying to shake up ostriches, it's because I sincerely want them to join me and to restore the dignity of their own movement.
Well, David, I think that's a noble thought.
Yeah.
We're all Americans. We're all in this together. We will hopefully, fingers crossed, prayers answered, get this figured out, and we will continue this one way or another, I'm sure. And it was nice talking to you. But we got to let these people go because I'm sure everybody, including me, has got to go to the bathroom.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.